morning. Good morning. Are we on? Good morning, everyone. I need it higher. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ottawa. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Su-Ling Ching, and it is my honor to be the President and CEO of the Ottawa Board of Trade. On behalf of Mayor Mark Sutcliffe, the Ottawa Board of Trade, and the Ottawa Business Journal, welcome to the first Mayor's Breakfast of 2025. I'm joined this morning by my co-presenter, Michael Curran, who is the president and publisher of the Ottawa Business Journal, our premier business media outlet. And I just want to take a minute and congratulate you on the launch of the Book of Lists, our highly anticipated annual publication that shows the success of all the businesses in Ottawa. Very good timing. So thank you for launching that. We are all thrilled to be gathered here together in our City Hall in beautiful downtown Ottawa. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We honor the peoples and land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. We honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. I want to say thank you to the Ottawa Board of Trade board members who were able to join us here this morning. Welcome to Melissa Reeves and Julie Lupinacci. I would like to say welcome to our partners who are with us today, including Invest Ottawa and Ottawa Tourism. Thank you for your steadfast leadership and collaboration. Many of you may have seen at the end of last year that we established a new initiative called Ottawa Unlimited, where we could further define the opportunities for us to work together to elevate the profile of what the Ottawa opportunity is in the global marketplace. I would like to acknowledge our OBOT ambassadors, specifically John Nelson, Helen Bird, and Aidan Dumont, for being here today and welcoming all of our members. Please join me in welcoming Councillor Hill, Councillor Carr, Turney, King, and Curry. Thank you all for being here this morning. Sorry, I shortened that up. Is that okay? We really appreciate you being here and for your steadfast leadership in Ottawa. I want to acknowledge our pillar partner, Enbridge Gas, who is here joining us this morning. Thank you for your contributions in helping us to elevate our important economic and advocacy work. And I want to say a special welcome to Pam and Grant Hooker. Where are you, Pam and Grant? Our 2023 Lifetime Achievement Award winners, better known for the Beaver Tails. So hopefully you guys, yes, that's right. Yes, an institution in Ottawa and all across the country, and so hopefully you got to enjoy some beaver tails, and you see a demonstration of how we can integrate beaver tails into any special or corporate events. So we appreciate you being here today, and we support beaver tails too much. I support beaver tails too much. I want to make a special welcome to my esteemed colleague, Daniel Tisch, who is our speaker today. He is the president and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, And I know you are so busy. We want to thank you for making the time to come to Ottawa, but also for the important work that you are doing on behalf of our Ottawa business community and the citizens of our whole country, to be frank. So the Board of Trade, our team, is very grateful to you for your partnership during these challenging times in particular. These last 2 weeks we have relied more than ever on the collaboration and calibration of our partners like the Ontario Chamber, the Canadian Chamber, the Canadian Global Cities Council, as well as local partners and business leaders, including the Mayor's Economic Council. We've done this, of course, to mitigate the impacts of the Trump effect, and I'm still working on what I'm going to consistently call this time that we're in, while leaving no stone unturned as it relates to strengthening our own economy and supporting our businesses during this time of transition. To quote Mr. Tisch, when things get rough, we have to get buff. Is that how it goes? Okay, so we're going to use that. So while we are calling on our representatives to continue negotiations and while we're working on the ground with our U.S. colleagues to leverage their influence, we are also asking for policies and programs that unlock our own full potential. As an example, we have been advocating for some time for the elimination of internal trade barriers. Now is the time to move quickly on this, potentially boosting our GDP nationally by over $200 billion, lowering prices and increasing productivity. Targeted transitional support for businesses like our Trade Accelerator program to help businesses expand their markets is a perfect long-term investment. Meanwhile, information is king. So thank you to the City of Ottawa for gathering all the partners together, designing a tariff toolkit, and for the partners sharing their resources. And get ready for the launch of a newly framed Shop Local campaign designed to give all of us the opportunity to support our local economy. Together, we remain Ottawa strong. As we kick off this morning's breakfast, we'd like to recognize the great organizations that support this breakfast series, our lead sponsor, Hydro Ottawa, the Weston Ottawa, RBC, Algonquin College, Edelman, Commissionaires Ottawa, Enbridge, the Ottawa Senators Hockey Club, and of course our global partners, Oakwood. Did I see John here this morning? Good morning, John. Thank you for your support. And the Casino Lac Limi. Our AV partner, Ottawa Print Services, our gift sponsor, Edmund Hardin, our coffee sponsor, maybe the most important one, Capital Office Interiors, our breakfast sponsor, La Cité, and of course, our special sponsor today, Beaver Tails. Thank you all. Say thank you, please, to all of our sponsors. Without their support, we would not be possible. It's now my pleasure to bring to the podium His Worship Mayor Mark Sutcliffe. Welcome.
Thank you, Celine. Good morning, everyone. Great to see such a terrific turnout this morning for the first Mayor's Breakfast event of 2025. Bienvenue à la première série de petits déjeuners du maire de 2025. And it's really terrific. Did everybody get a beaver tail, by the way? I'm so glad that Grant is here, and we're supporting a great local business. There's no tariffs on beaver tails, so we can all enjoy them. But look, a lot has happened since the last time we gathered for a mayor's breakfast, obviously, as you all know. The new U.S. president has been sworn in, and he's had a few things to say about Canada, as I'm sure you've heard. The Prime Minister announced he's stepping down, and we're into a Liberal leadership race now. The Premier called a provincial election, which is tomorrow. And of course, in addition to all of that, Canada won the most important hockey game in a decade. Yeah. I know we're all still celebrating that and also getting used to cheering for Brady Tkachuk again. That's a bit of an adjustment. Mais avant d'accueillir notre invité ce matin, je voudrais prendre quelques instants pour parler de notre situation en tant que ville. Before we welcome our guest this morning, I wanted to take a few moments to talk about where we're at as a city, what's ahead, and how these big changes impact our community. As many of you know, I was born in Ottawa. I've lived my whole life in this city. Ottawa has always been my home, and I have to say, I talk about this all the time, it always amazes me to see how much the city has changed over the years during my lifetime. My kids are not growing up in the same Ottawa that I did. There's so much more happening in the city now. We have the Senators, of course. We also have the Ottawa Charge and other professional sports teams. Notre vie nocturne est très animée. Nos festivals et nos restaurants sont de classe mondiale. We have an amazing, vibrant nightlife scene. Our festivals and our restaurants are world-class. Ottawa has grown into a dynamic, diverse, and exciting city. And I love that my kids are growing up in this version of Ottawa. But I have to say, for the first time in a long time, I've been thinking about the city that they will be living in 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Nous sommes confrontés à une grande incertitude économique. We're facing a lot of economic uncertainty, not just because of the tariffs, but also because of the potential for federal job cuts and other pressures. The federal government's talking about reducing its downtown footprint by as much as 50%, which will have a huge impact on our core. And you may have heard there was a recent ruling by the federal court in favor of the federal government, who are not paying their fair share of taxes in Ottawa. That is disappointing to us at the City of Ottawa, and our city staff are reviewing that decision to determine next steps. But regardless of the ruling, regardless of what happens in court, the clear evidence remains that the federal government and its agencies have been underpaying their taxes to the City of Ottawa for years. To me, this is not an issue for the courts. It's an issue of simple fairness, and I'm going to continue to fight for our fair share and ensure that the burden that has been shifted to local taxpayers is addressed. And I know my colleagues on Ottawa City Council who are here today are going to join me in that fight and have been with me all along. We're also facing many other challenges, as you know, including building more homes, building more affordable homes, addressing homelessness and food insecurity. These are big, big challenges that demand bold solutions. Tomorrow, Ontario is going to the polls in a provincial election, and then in just over a week from now, the federal Liberals will choose a new leader. And after that, we could be looking at a federal election in the very near future. And as your mayor, my job is clear. I will work with whoever is in office to get the best outcomes for Ottawa. I will fight for our fair share, and that is why I have worked very hard to develop a strong working relationship, a partnership with both the provincial Progressive Conservative government and the federal Liberal government. And because of that, we have seen real results for Ottawa. As you all know, a couple of weeks ago, we made a historic announcement. Provincial leaders have promised to upload Ottawa's LRT, which will significantly reduce risk for local taxpayers and also save us literally billions of dollars over the coming years. That is truly a game changer for Ottawa, so we will be working hard to follow through on that commitment. We will also work hard to protect our local economy from tariffs and the potential impact of federal job cuts. We're going to continue to work with the Board of Trade and the amazing work that Su Ling and her team have done on revitalizing our downtown. And we will do all we can to support the most vulnerable in our city in a time of significant need. A couple of weeks ago, I established the new Mayor's Economic Council, bringing together the leaders of our major economic development and business organizations, many of whom are in the room today, including Su Ling. We've already met a couple of times, and we're tackling these issues together. We're working together to make sure that we are confronting these challenges. We also passed a motion at City Council to review our procurement practices to ensure that we're buying local and buying Canadian. And we're launching a new marketing campaign to encourage everyone to shop local. We're working hard to make sure that we are buying local and buying Canadian. We're encouraging residents and businesses to do the same. And let's also remember that we have an extremely complex economic situation, and there are many local businesses that sell products that come from other parts of the world, including the United States. There are businesses here in Ottawa that employ local people, like a furniture store or a local car dealership. They might be selling a product that originates in the United States or has parts from the United States, but it's still an Ottawa business that employs local people. Il s'agit toujours d'une entreprise d'Ottawa qui emploie des personnes de la région. So we all have to be careful and strategic about our buying decisions. So we are supporting local businesses, but we're not causing collateral damage to our local companies and workers. On top of all of that, I've been working closely with the Mayor of Gatineau on regional priorities, because when we speak with one voice, we are stronger. C'est une partant d'une seule voix que nous sommes plus forts. Since the 2002 election, I've been talking regularly about Team Ottawa, and I think when I started using that term, Team Ottawa, I think a few people thought it was kind of corny at first, but today it's never been more important. We must work together as a city, as businesses, as community leaders, to protect and grow our local economy, to create jobs, to revitalize downtown and the Byward Market, to support our most vulnerable, to build more homes. Because just like in that hockey game from last week, this is a moment that calls for teamwork and leadership and decisive action. So let's get to work and let's keep working together. So now I have the pleasure of welcoming our guest, Daniel Tisch Echevarria, who is the new president and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to talk about some of these issues and a lot more. Daniel brings decades of experience in business, communications, and government to this job, and I can't think of a better person to speak with this morning, at this time in particular, at this moment in our history, about what lies ahead and what we are confronting and how we need to tackle these challenges. So please join me in welcoming Daniel to the stage. So the very first thing I have to do, Daniel, is present you with this beaver tail. This is a wonderful, wonderful local business, a tradition in our city, especially around this time of year during winterlude. So we have a beaver tail for you.
Thank you so much. Well, I actually lived in Ottawa for 8 years, and one of my favorite things to do, this is when I was young, this is when I was in my 20s, I spent most of my 20s here, and one of my favorite things to do was skate on the Rideau Canal, and it's great to see that that's, apparently this is a good year for the canal once again.
It's been a very good year for that, yeah.
Although I got to say in Toronto, we're close to calling out the Army again, because of the amount of snow.
Yeah.
But I remember, how delicious the beaver tail was and something hot to drink after that long skate back in those cold winters of the early 90s.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're glad to be here in Ottawa, where we actually have been successful in plowing the streets over the last couple of days.
All right, so let's just agree, no more snow talk and no more Leaf Senators talk, okay?
Yeah,
How about that?
That's fine.
So,
That's fine. But before we go any further, I should point out you have a little, you're injured.
Yes, it's a sports injury. It's
okay.
tennis, not hockey, right?
Tennis.
The old guy trying to keep up with three younger guys. And getting the ball over the net, but then wiping out, and yeah, it's broken, but I'm doing fine.
But you made the shot, right?
I made the shot.
Okay, that's all that matters.
Exactly.
So listen, before we get into some of the issues, I wanted to share a little bit about your background, because you have a fascinating life story. And when we spoke on the phone, I told you a little bit about my family history and how my mother's family ended up in Canada, and I've told that story before. But you have kind of a similar story in that your ancestors, your parents, and their families come from different parts of the world, met and then ended up in Canada. So just walk us through that, because it's a very interesting story.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, so do we have about 45 minutes for this answer? So my father was a Jewish refugee from the Holocaust. Right. He was born. He was an Austrian-Hungarian Jew. He was born in Budapest. They lived in Bielsko, Poland. Right, not too far from the German border. The Nazis marched in September 1939, and my grandfather finally realized, we got to get out, right? His family had been leaving. They've been saying there was going to be war. He didn't believe that the war would happen, right? And so they had to dash out of there. My father lost 2 of his grandparents in the Holocaust. The family made it to Barcelona. They tried to find a country that would take them. I'm not proud to say that Canada said no at the time. None is too many was, the motto of the time for Jews. But Uruguay would take them as long as they arrived first class. So they had to scrape up money. Even though they were quite wealthy, they had no liquid assets. So they lost everything. They borrowed and borrowed money, sold stuff, made their passage to Uruguay. My father grew up there speaking Spanish, became Latin American effectively, culturally, and met my mother in the 60s, and they moved to Spain. And when they left Uruguay, Uruguay is about to slide into dictatorship. They go to Spain, they live under another dictatorship. They didn't want their eldest son to have military service in Franco's army, right? So they said, we're coming to Canada, right? And it was interesting because at the time it was the US or Canada. They weren't sure which. But I'm very glad that my father chose Canada. He arrived with nothing, and 41 years later he retired as managing partner of the nation's largest architectural firm. So, quite an amazing story. He died last year, which is obviously very sad, but he was almost 90, and what an incredible life he had.
Wow.
So, yeah, and
that's an amazing story.
So,
yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And how's that, having that background, having that history, having, understanding some of the dynamics of the choices that your family made, the choices that they were unable to make originally, how has that shaped your view and the work that you do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Well, a couple of things. I mean, I don't remember coming to Canada. I was very small at the time, but I do remember seeing my parents struggle. I do remember a time when Toronto was not the great multicultural, astounding city that it is today. And I think in me, it instilled not just a belief in, prosperity as a business person, but in prosperity that's inclusive and that's sustainable. And that's, so I was very much, when I left university, I went to Queen's University, and all I wanted to do was come and work in Ottawa, right? I had no interest whatsoever in business at the time. And I wanted to change the world, right? So I was really passionate, full of energy, came here, loved those years. And it wasn't till I did an MBA and actually thought, there might be something in business after all. I was advising Canadian companies on their trade with the United States. I was working in the government. And I woke up and said, I shouldn't say I woke up. It wasn't one single moment. But I realized over time, I'm advising businesses, but I've never worked in business. So I moved to Toronto, got into consulting, and now the beauty of where I am now, it's my first nonprofit leadership role, but it's kind of bringing together, my public sector passion with, my 25 years in business, leading and growing a small business to a mid-sized one. So, it's been an incredible journey. But I still think, especially right now in this moment, when we see just absolutely appalling behavior and attitudes taking shape south of the border, and to some extent, let's be honest with ourselves here as well, around this backtrack and this backlash on diversity and inclusion. And I think that is such a strategic error for any country that wants to attract the best talent in the world right now.
It's a great point. So how would you characterize the challenges that we're facing right now and what their impact will be? Because I think it's very easy for us to enumerate kind of what's going on, as I just did, but what is the net result of that? What's the impact of that on Ontario and on Canada?
Well, it's huge, and let me give you some perspective, Mark, based on our Ontario Economic Report, which we released February 13th. So we do an annual survey, we've been doing it for 12 years, of business confidence in Ontario. Mainly small business, of course, 98% of business is small business here, but all business. And we had some pretty good news when we did the survey in December. We always do it in December, we release it in early February. And this year, business confidence in Ontario went up to 26%, right, versus 48% who were not confident. Now, you might say those aren't great numbers, but for perspective, a year ago, only 13% of businesses were confident, right? That was the lowest number ever, right? So business confidence doubled, right? And here's what's even more interesting. Almost half of businesses actually were confident, not in the economy necessarily, but in their own outlook. They believed they were going to grow this year, right? Now, because we were releasing it on February 13th, I said to our team, well, we better do it again, because this is like literally, this is the week after you had that infamous Trump-Trudeau phone call. So the day after that phone call, we went back into the field. Business confidence dropped right back down, right? So it went from 13 to 26, 13 in December 23, 26 in December 24, 15%, granted, with all the noise about tariffs. I mean, I don't know if that's durable. But so, and then 67% of businesses said, this is going to hurt my business. How are they going to adapt? The three biggest answers they gave to how they were going to adapt: raise prices, diversify suppliers, lay off staff, right? Now, two of those things are not good news, right? And so that puts it in perspective in terms of what businesses are telling us right here, right now. I mean, I was talking to Melissa Reeves here just before we started, and she runs an architectural studio here, and she was telling me about projects being deferred or denied, and we are hearing this from our members right across Ontario, right? So that's the bad news. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much here, but
not at all.
But I will say though that I've never seen more energy in the business community. I've never seen more unity among ordinary people. I've never seen more responsiveness from government, and a real determination that we all share right now to turn talk into action. And those things actually, despite all the challenges, they make me really optimistic.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. So what are some of the steps that we can take? And I know, at a time like this, people throw out different ideas and they talk about things at a broad level, diversifying our economy, reducing our reliance on the United States, building relationships with other countries, eliminating interprovincial trade barriers. Can you talk about how realistic some of those things are, and at a practical level, what we need to do to execute on some of them? Because, for example, on the interprovincial trade barriers, I hear that all the time, but I don't know if anybody knows exactly what we need to do. Right. What are the ones that need to be eliminated? Which would have the greatest impact? How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, for sure. There's lots of things we got to get done, and we got to get them done now, right? And the good news is, I alluded earlier to how quickly government is responding. Let me give you two examples. We set up at the Ontario Chamber what we call the Ontario Business and Trade Leadership Coalition. So it includes the leaders, like the CEOs of the industry associations for all the major trade-dependent sectors in Ontario, right? So you can imagine, manufacturing, mining, forestry, agriculture and food, energy, electricity, et cetera. Those are only a few. Plus some leaders from chambers of commerce and boards of trade, including Suling. And we set it up. I called the Premier, I think the Sunday after he called the election, I called him to let him know we were doing this. And I said, at some point, we'd love you to meet with this group as soon as possible. The meeting happened the next day. The next day, within 24 hours. When the premiers came to their agreement on in principle, to reduce internal trade barriers a few weeks back, I texted Anita Anand, the internal trade minister. She responded within 15 minutes. We had a call half an hour later. We had a meeting with our chamber members and leaders, like a week later. So this responsiveness is really exciting, and I think there's a chance to make progress. We have to triage the businesses and the industries that are most affected. I look at small manufacturers in particular, right? So who's trade dependent, who's not? They have to be our priority in trade negotiations. They have to be our priority in business support programs as well, because it's like that. Bruce, I'm a Springsteen fan. I hope there are others here. That the line from my hometown, right? Foreman says these jobs are going, boys, and they ain't coming back. Well, that's what happens when a small manufacturer is downsizing, reducing their footprint, And if that footprint goes, it's not coming back. So we have to save those footprints. Internal trade. People, this is kind of abstract. How much has it come up in the Ontario election? I'd say probably not at all, right? But if you think about it, it means lower prices and more choice for consumers. It means more opportunities for business to ship our products and services and sell our products and services in other provinces. It means for government more tax revenue that they can, use to lower taxes or improve services or support businesses in transition. And for workers, it means the opportunity to go anywhere in the country. And that, I think, is probably the most critical place to start. It's labor mobility. It's looking at mutual recognition of credentials, because you don't need to do a lot of legislative changes to codes and things and industry and professional rules if you simply say, we're Ontario, you're Nova Scotia, we're going to recognize your credentials here, right? We don't have to adjust our standards. We just say we're going to accept yours.
I think there's about 12 Bruce Springsteen songs that talk about the factory closing and losing jobs. And
it's kind of the narrative, isn't it? Right?
But so the labor mobility, I think that's a really important one that should not be overlooked. But are there particular barriers? And this, I always talk about how this is a particular challenge for Ottawa because we're the only economic region in the country of a major metropolitan city that's got a provincial border running through it. There's no other place in Canada like this where we've got one economic region with a provincial border. So are there specific barriers that we ought to remove? Have you talked to businesses that have identified what's stopping them from selling their products in another province?
Well, I find it's helpful just to look at things everybody can understand, right? And so, I arrived in Ottawa, I think I was 21 years old, right? And we used to go across, it wasn't called Gatineau then, it was called Hull, as you know, and we used to go across and, go to the dépanneur and get beer, right? Technically, we were breaking the law by buying beer in Hull and bringing it across the bridge to Ottawa, right? And so that's one that people often think about. Obviously, that's a celebrated one, right? The case of I think it was the New Brunswick guy who tried to take beer across the Quebec border and, was charged for this. It's crazy, right? It's crazy that it's easier for me to go into the LCBO and buy a bottle of wine from California, which I'm not doing anymore, by the way, right, for now, right? Or South Africa or Spain or Australia, but not from BC, right? I think that's absolutely crazy. So that's one anyone can understand. The one that comes up the most, though, I find in business discussion is trucking, right? And there's actually a story of another border town, not a big thriving metropolis like Ottawa Gatineau, but farther north, where there's a town on the border. There's a town in Ontario, a town in Quebec, right on the border. And the story is that the manufacturer in one town is shipping something across the border, right? And because of trucking standards being different, the Ontario truck takes it to the border, they have to unload it, put it on the Quebec truck, and take it over to the customer, right? So think of the cost involved, think of the time involved, think of the waste involved in doing that. It's absolutely crazy, right? And while there may be good reasons for how we got here, it's like Tiff Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada, I was speaking to him last week, and he was giving a speech at a Board of Trade in Mississauga, and he was saying, we did this to ourselves, but we can undo it, right? So that is probably the number one thing on the list of things which we can control. And if you think about the potential lift to our GDP, it would significantly offset anything from this guy south of the border.
I know you recently accompanied the premiers on the trip to Washington. Can you talk about that experience and what you learned from that, what came out of that?
Sure. Yeah, talking to Americans. It's like that Rick Mercer show all those years ago, right? It was fascinating, right? It was literally 2 weeks ago, this very morning, right now, I woke up in Washington, D.C., and I was sort of thinking about, the previous 36 hours, because We had all the provincial premiers in town. We met with, and I went down and met with business leaders. I went to the U.S. Chamber. The U.S. Chamber has been one of the few business voices that has been really reliable and really strong against this tariff madness, right? And they've been very clear in saying tariffs are a tax on Americans. Tariffs are a tax paid by Americans at the worst possible time. So it's like, yes, but so few business leaders, and frankly, so few chambers, other than the national chamber, are being brave enough to stick up their heads. And you understand it, right? I mean, they fear retribution, they fear loss of access. So their advocacy is very, very quiet, right? And of course, ours is very loud, right? We're going down there. And it was interesting, though, because we could not find one single business leader, we could not find one single politician, we met with Republicans and others, who thought that tariffs on Canada were a good idea, right? And they were saying slightly ridiculous things, frankly, like, well, this 51st state thing, that's actually a compliment, right? Or, the most common sentiment was, you know what, the president just wants, to strike a deal, so we got to get to the negotiating table, right? And so let's get to the table. The sooner we can get to the table, the sooner we can get a deal, the sooner we can get to the certainty and the predictability that you want, right? But let's be honest, this is not about the border, right? It's very easy to be distracted by this. The idea that the that the border between Canada and the U.S. is a threat to the U.S. is utterly absurd, right? It's a fiction in which we exist because Trump does not have the authority to impose tariffs without Congress unless he can say there's a national emergency, right? If anything, the border threat is much greater the other way around, right? Is it about economic logic? No, right? I mean, this guy is treating he's actually arguing with a straight face that a trade deficit is a subsidy, right? Rather than the reality, which is America simply producing less than it consumes, right? It's like me going to the beaver tail truck and eating 20 beaver tails and then calling a press conference and saying, we've been subsidizing the beaver tail industry for too long, Mr. Beavertail has treated us very badly, right? It's like that, right? It is.
I didn't know impressions were part of what we were getting today, so this is great.
But, it's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous, and everybody knows it's ridiculous, but no one can say it's ridiculous, right? And so, so meanwhile, am I more optimistic we'll get to a deal? Yes, after that trip. I don't know when, and I don't know how much crazy stuff we're going to have to deal with between now and then. But here's the problem. The damage has already been done, right? It's like the stories we were just talking about, right? This is what we see in our survey. Investments delayed, investments deferred, stress for small business people, manufacturers. Who is going to invest right now in the U.S. or Canada without knowing what their costs of input are going to be, what the cost of labor is going to be, it's not good for anybody. But, the problem is it's not about economic facts or logic, it's about a story. It's about a narrative about, America being threatened by dark forces that are trying to invade the country or, other countries wanting to rip them off. And so we need a counter-narrative that's just as emotionally powerful, and that's pretty hard, right? I don't think we're going to get there. But the counter-narrative is still strong, and that's that America is immeasurably stronger with Canada as a partner. And ultimately, I think most Americans believe that. I know most Americans believe that. And I know that most Republicans believe that.
So best case scenario, we're able to find a way forward as a partner with the United States, but a lot of people have been talking as well about how we need to reduce our dependency on the United States, our economic dependency on the United States. Is that realistic? Because, we have benefited so greatly from having this close economic partnership with the world's largest economy. Yeah. Is it even realistic to say, well, we can replace all of that just by doing more business with Europe, for example?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not that easy, right? Of course, it's not that easy. And look, it's all, I can't imagine in my lifetime or yours, Mark, the U.S. is always going to be our largest trading partner, but it doesn't have to be 75% of our trade, right? And frankly, again, we have to be honest with ourselves and with our governments, right? We've been a little complacent, right? We've got to replace complacency with competitiveness. We've got to replace dependence on one market with diversification to many markets. And that's our challenge, that's our opportunity right now. But I think there's a lot of things we can do. We talked about internal trade barriers. We talked about productivity. It's good to hear now, the likely next Prime Minister of Canada, will be elected in a couple of weeks, talking a lot about productivity, right? Yes, we've been saying this for years, right? His competitor, for the role later in the year in the election, saying the same thing, right? And so that agenda is super important, right? How do we build a more productive economy? How do we diversify our trade patterns? We've got all these free trade agreements that we've established with other nations, so we've got to get busy providing businesses with support and guidance and incentives to help them diversify their trade relationships. That's absolutely critical. And I guess that brings me to, our Ontario election platform, Ontario Competes. Encourage everyone to look it up and maybe read it before you go to vote tomorrow and think about which party, which candidate in your constituency, best exemplifies, this advice if you agree with our advice. But we're saying, they're the building blocks of competitiveness, right? It's a competitive business environment. It is, strong and growth-oriented infrastructure. It's skilled workers and people and talent, and it's healthy communities, right? And those are really the four pillars, and we've got to look at those four things. And I will say, since we're here in this, magnificent building, and I'm speaking to the mayor, healthy communities includes healthy municipalities. And it is not sustainable, and I've said this many times. I said it at AMO when I spoke at AMO here in Ottawa last year. We've got to end this situation, which is not sustainable, where municipalities are reliant on the property tax as their principal source of revenue. That's just not sustainable. And so, we can applaud for that.
Yeah, the city councilors
the city councilors are really enthusiastic about this. But really, I mean, we've inherited. This goes back to the British North America Act, obviously, right? The division of powers, and the biggest municipality in Canada was probably a few thousand people back then, maybe 10,000, 20,000, I'm not exactly sure. But certainly, I don't think we had even one at 100,000 back then, right? And so, all of a sudden now we've got municipalities with populations in the millions, municipalities being asked to shoulder immense burdens that, to use your words from earlier, are unfair, right? Without the support of other orders of government. And you look at the impact of mental health, of homelessness, of addictions, the streets of I've been to 40 Ontario communities in the last year in this job, and my God, right? This is a crisis, and businesses are on the front lines of this crisis, right? People often forget that, right? They talk about, understandably, the frontline workers and agencies, healthcare system, but businesses are on the front lines, and they don't have the training to deal with it, right? And so, I think for healthy communities, we need diversified approaches to mental health and addictions. And when you ask businesses, I alluded to our survey, the number one thing that they want, lower taxes. No surprise there, right? Lower cost of doing business. But if you look at the number 2, 3, and 4 things they want, it's all about their workers and their communities. The number 2 priority of business in Ontario, healthcare. Better healthcare, access to family doctors. Number 3 priority was housing. Sorry, I'm wrong. Housing was number 2. Healthcare was number 3. So where am the people that work for me, where are they going to live? And is it affordable? And number 3 was healthcare. Number 4 is workforce, right? Quality of the workforce. And that's why we have to invest in post-secondary education, another area that's been neglected in Ontario for far too long. Now, it's not all bad. I mean, the government has done some really good things around infrastructure. And we certainly have supported that direction: energy infrastructure, transit infrastructure, broadband. The ambitious plan to double Ontario's electricity capacity. Those are all amazing things, but you can't. And then attracting life sciences investments from abroad, EV manufacturing, supply chain. That's all great stuff. but we're doing all this great work to attract the industries of the future, so we need to invest just as much in training the workforce of the future, and that's where reinvestment, big reinvestment in our colleges and universities is absolutely essential.
So there are at least 3 presidents and CEOs of colleges and universities in the audience who are here today, okay. So they're very happy to hear you say that. And you know, of course, we're happy to hear what you had to say about property taxes, because we have a system that was designed more than 150 years ago for, you know, challenges that were very, very different at that time. Nobody imagined what we would be tackling as municipalities in 2025 when the property tax system was created in the 1800s. So that needs to change, obviously. Can you talk more about the provincial election? It's tomorrow, so you know it's a little late to be talking about what kind of issues you'd like to see discussed in the campaign. But we're here. We're almost at the finish line. The polls seem to be pointing towards a certain outcome. What's your sense of how things are going to play out, and how a newly elected government can, you know, what the opportunities are to really drive economic growth in Ontario at a critical time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and look, I mean, we're a nonpartisan organization. We're proud to work with all the parties. We have good relationships with all the parties. You know, we've supported a lot of what the government has done. When they've agreed with something, we've said so, right? But we supported, private members' bills by each of the opposition parties at least once, you know, around the Liberals had a bill for lower taxes, the NDP had a bill around employee ownership of business. The Green Party had a bill supporting gentle densification at the municipal level. We supported all of those, right? But we supported a lot of government bills as well. And so, yeah, it's not a partisan thing, but I am encouraged that in Ontario, all of the party leaders want to work with the business community, right? They all have an appreciation. Most of them have actually worked in business, and so I think that's a real strength, right? And so, we need them to work closely with us and to see us as a partner and an ally, not an afterthought in terms of consultation. And we need to work together on this competitiveness agenda that we've been talking about, right? And so immediate priorities, there's going to be a budget coming up. Well, I want to see a big investment in post-secondary education. I've said that to all the leaders. I said it to the finance minister a couple of weeks ago. We need to see, obviously, the work continuing around primary health care. It was encouraging to see the government, just before the election, commit to connect 2 million more Ontarians to a family doctor. But the Ontario Medical Association says the need is probably double that by 2027. So that's another area where there's got to be focus. Housing, an obvious area, right? Again, come back to gentle densification. We've got, the tariff threat, which has been the #1 issue in the election. So I come back to what I was saying before, triaging businesses and industries that are going to be most affected and looking at strategies to support them, right? You know, how are we going to ensure we save that footprint, right? And the other thing that I know the government is quite worried about, assuming if they're reelected, of course, is they've done all this work, immense amount of work attracting international investment. Well, the last thing we want now is to surrender those gains, right? Because, what we talked about earlier, should I invest in Canada right now given the uncertainty? So anything the government can do now to de-risk that, I think is going to be really important. Infrastructure, right? Like, so we're getting better at building infrastructure, but we need to think as a country, how are we flowing our goods across the country, right? So a lot of energy flows very easily from north to south, but obviously we need to flow better from east to west, so that it can get to markets overseas. So those are a few things aligned with what I was saying earlier in terms of the agenda that we'd like to see. And in fact, I've got an op-ed probably in the Toronto Star running the day after the election just on what some of those early priorities should be. So we keep doing the work, and I will say that there's the reason that we get our calls returned quickly is because we've got this extraordinary coalition, and I'm so grateful for that. We've got 60,000 businesses across Ontario. We've got 150 chambers. And the wonderful thing about chambers of commerce and boards of trade is we don't just represent big business, we don't just represent small business, we represent all business in every community. And that makes our movement incredibly wise for government to heed and incredibly difficult for government to ignore. So that makes me grateful.
This is a moment unlike any other that we've seen in recent history, and I think you've alluded already to the fact that in moments like these, we do have to look at it as an opportunity as well, and an opportunity for decisive action. You know, sometimes things move very slowly when we're trying to achieve economic progress, when we're trying to change the rules, do things differently. Are you confident that we can seize this moment to get people working together and to really break down barriers and move quickly in ways that we couldn't if it were not a crisis?
Yeah. Well, I have to be confident, right? And I don't, I've always said that what we need, both in business and in government, is we need critical thinkers, but we don't need cynical thinkers, right? My view has always been, if you're going to be a cynic, we don't really need you, right? You know what I mean, right? If you're going to be a critic, right, but come with not just a problem but a solution, then we very much need you. We want you, right? And I think we have to have an optimistic spirit. We have to look at our assets, and let's be confident, right? I mean, there's this old analogy that really bugs me about Canada, and what's the old, I forget who said it. I think it was maybe Pierre Burton or somebody, right? Some Canadian long ago says, when the U.S., something happens in the U.S., it affects Canada like an elephant rolling over onto a mouse. But we're not a mouse, right? I mean, we are the 10th largest or ninth largest economy in the world. We're a country of 41 million people. We've got incredible assets that America needs and the world needs, right? They cannot function their economy without our energy, which fuels their cars, without our electricity, which heats their homes, without our minerals, which enable their military to build their equipment. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And we've got to be confident in having these assets and understanding their value, right? So it's showing our strength and being prepared to use it. It's giving Americans, showing them there's a better alternative to the destructive path that this administration is on so far. And meanwhile, finally, it's, Sue Lin quoted me earlier, but, if it's going to get tough, we got to get buff. And I believe we can do it. I believe we will do it. I believe we must do it. How easy it'll be, I don't know. How long it'll take, I don't know either. But I think we've got to go along that path, right? I mean, I quoted Bruce Springsteen earlier. The other musician that I'm a big fan of is Neil Young, and he's got that line about instead of cursing the darkness, light a candle to where we're going. That's the sort of thinking we need.
Agreed. This has been great. It's so great to hear your insights and perspective on all of this, and also to know that you're working away and maintaining, sustaining that message in front of our political leaders, especially at a time of when there's an election and a newly elected government that's about to take office. So thank you for sharing all of this with us today, and thank you for all the work that you and your team are doing to support Ontario's economy. We're really grateful. This has been a wonderful chat. Thanks so much.
Mayor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Sutcliffe. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Curran from the Ottawa Business Journal. I've got the great pleasure of thanking you, Daniel, today for spending some time with us. When you were speaking, I was reflecting on the role the Ontario Chamber plays, the Ottawa Board of Trade plays, and I always think pre-pandemic that a lot of business people might have thought that this concept of advocacy was a little bit fuzzy pre-pandemic. Well, the pandemic really changed that. I think of Sue Ling speaking with Vera Etches on an almost daily basis to give her good advice. I'm reflecting on you, Daniel, in Washington, trying to get that important message across the Americans that tariffs will be as punishing to them as it will be to us. So I want to thank you on behalf of all the business people here today for the role you play. This is bringing clarity to the purpose of chambers of commerce, boards of trade. And I guess I want to also make sure that people realize there's a direct connection between you in the audience here in the Ontario Chamber. So through your membership in OBOT, they are supporting you, and they are very close organizations, just to make that completely clear. So thank you very much, Daniel, for being here today. And as a token of our appreciation, I'm going to ask JD Sharp, I saw JD somewhere. There he is, to come forward and present you with a token of our appreciation, this gift basket of course, local gifts from Glebe and the Bank Street, I think, JD, is that right? All right. We'll have you guys step forward here and give a round of applause for Daniel. Thank you, JD. JD and I have done a few podcasts, too, I think, on employment law, and he does a great job through his expertise, but also your practical approach to employment law. So thank you to JD, and thank you to Eamon Harnden for being a great supporter of the Mayor's Breakfast. We got a couple other gifts. First off, we've got a $200 gift certificate to the Casino Lac Limi. I think Miguel is here. He's going to do the presentation, maybe not, but we'll get Daniel certainly to draw a winner. So this is a $200 gift certificate to the Hilton Lac Limi. Daniel, who is the lucky recipient? Chris O'Gorman. Is Chris here? Yeah, all right, Chris. Well, just visit us at the registration table, and we also have now. Well, I won't ask you what your sports affiliation is in hockey, but we've got an Ottawa Senators. Okay, that was a safe assumption on my part. Maybe we'll skip right over that. We've got an Ottawa Senators signed hockey stick by none other than number 19 Batherson, one of the young great players on the Ottawa Senators. So let's see who's going to win this.
I did go to a Senators game in the first season.
Okay. Still at the Civic Center back then. All right. And the lucky recipient is Rebecca Huxtable. Is Rebecca here? All right. So come on down after the breakfast. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate that. Yes, I remember that tennis injury. You're not shaking hands with your right. I saw that. All right, we'll have things wrapped up here in a minute. Just a few other items. I want to recognize a couple members of the OBJ team with us here. Is Wendy Bailey here? Scanning the audience. Victoria, they're somewhere out there. But thank you to the OBJ team for everything they're doing. And thank you, Sue Ling. You pointed out that we launched last Wednesday a publication, the Mayor's